Okay, welcome back to another episode of Conversations Between Women. Let's just see where we meander today.
I sort of have the sense that you are maybe experiencing something I'm experiencing.
I'm experiencing some stuff, but
yeah, just like both of us getting on the call and being like, okay, here we go.
It's just hard to get here sometimes, it just is like a lot of coordinating and worth the effort. And I really want to be here, so I feel like I always have to deal with a little bit of finagling, making sure everybody's situated before I can leave them all. So, which it's all fine. Everything was fine. Like it all worked out. It's just, Waleila's in a swim every day for the next 2 weeks. So every morning, I don't want to drive to town for 30 minutes. It takes me 30 minutes to get there. We do a 30-minute swim class, and then I drive 30 minutes back home. And but I really want her to get like intense time in the pool before summer starts. So I'm doing it, and it's fine, but it's a lot of going. And we've been looking for a new car. I bought a new car, but it's a full-time job to find a new car, and that just kind of shook up our reality a little bit of like what we thought we wanted versus what we were saying we wanted versus like what we could actually afford, and all these things. And it was just an interesting process. So I will never ever go to a car dealership again. It's like Sam and I walked out of there, we were like, wow, man, I feel like they took a lot of, like, I felt like they took a lot of energy. He felt like they just straight up roofied him. He's like, what just happened? I just signed all these papers. I don't know where these papers are going. I don't know where my money just went. Like, what just happened? So it was a very interesting experience for sure. I've never bought a car from a dealership before, I don't think. I've only bought from individuals. So that was interesting. But this new car, it's got a freaking vacuum cleaner in it. It's got it's ridiculous. It's got 3 sunroofs. Like it's one of those push button starts. It's so not me. And I have decided I am okay with my car not being my identity, right? Like I always have driven classic cars. Like I've always bought classic cars, and then we got this van that we bought from Sam's parents, and I can't go to any other car because there's so much room. And so it's either go back to my old style van, which I sold, that old, 1980 something huge conversion van that's awesome, has so much space, is so comfortable. So it's like I'm not going to go back and buy one of those because the reasons that I sold it's not like really great for car seats and stuff. So this is like part van, part kind of RV, but still like feels like you're driving like a small car. And so when they told me I had a vacuum cleaner built in, I was like, that's ridiculous. That's so bougie. And I had kept thinking about it. I was like, wow, there's a vacuum cleaner that I can just like quickly vacuum stuff up. Like it's the funniest thing. So yeah, it's been totally like a head trip. And I just keep thinking about my mentor. When I first met her, the first class we did together, she said, you are not who you think you are. You are somebody completely different. And I'm like, that's not what she was talking about. But this is like a small example of how I am not who I think I am right now. So,
but it kind of totally is. I mean, this whole identity thing has been really hitting me this week too. And
okay, cool.
Like we have these ideas about, we all have ideas about who we are, but then we have like meta ideas about like an idea of who we are that is bigger than who we are, and so we think that we really know like what the three-dimensional expression of that is. But that's so funny because it's actually making me think of when you bought your farm, and what you would tell people is that like I have champagne taste on a beer budget, and then also we had a podcast where we were talking about maybe it was about manifesting or whatever, but about like maybe God wants you to have like a huge house and the whole thing, and so it's like we sort of become accustomed to sort of our way of being in the world because it's associated with our values. Like you value simplicity, you value being connected to the earth, you value like real living, tactile, tangible, earth-based living. And so the idea that you would have this like push button fancy car seems incongruous with your values and with you know who you think you are, but in reality none of it actually has anything to do with who you are, the earth-based thing or the car. Like it's just these expressions of this divinity in you that's way bigger and way more expansive and way more multifaceted and complex and than you can really even wrap your head around. And I don't think it's like, I feel like in the past I may have thought this, and I could see people looking at this and being like, yeah, but I mean, everybody thinks that they, you know, want to live simply until they like get handed a, you know, the lottery winnings or something, and then they're like, yeah, I want to buy a new car and a new house. And you know, like we all think we have these like ethical ideals and morals about how we're supposed to be living, but then when we're handed the golden ticket, we take it. But I don't actually think it's that, like you can't dismiss it that easily, because it's not like that's like a social justice warrior kind of approach to looking at it. And yeah, I don't know, I guess there's two big things that it's bringing up for me. Like one is identity, and then one is right living based on like sacredness and deep value and how to hold all the different expressions of God, like that earth is an expression of God and how we relate to earth is an expression of God. And also like we are given these things that seem to be completely disharmonious with that. Like, you're like, I just bought a new phone. I was going to go your route, and I was like, I'm done with phones and the whole thing when my phone broke. But I finally reached a point where I was like, I just can't do this. I need to have a phone. I need to stop doing this thing that I'm doing. Like, I just need to go buy a phone. And it happened that I was going to be near the Apple store. And so I went and just, like, I just made the choice and bought this phone. And I had the awareness that I was like, everything about a phone, everything about an iPhone, like, conceptually is not really what I align with. You know, like, I don't like that all these things have to be mined from the earth in order to make this technology. I don't like that it creates garbage when it's done, and not that everything else doesn't, but just I don't know, that association with it, and then the way that I see people interacting with their phones and what it creates of life, it just because all of the things that you could have an issue with. But I've also carried with me this whole last year and a half since I started doing Joe Dispenza's work, like, of what a blessing my iPhone has been for me and how it's completely facilitated me changing my life. And I know that that's the case for a lot of people, like the access to resources, the access to meditations. Like, if I didn't have my phone, I wouldn't have been so consistent and so on top of my meditations and so on top of like the work that I was doing, and being able to have access to groups now after going to an event that kept me up with even more like twice a day meditations versus once a day, and coherence healings and all this stuff that came along with having a phone. And as soon as I decided to buy a phone, I bought the phone, and then the next day had this like line of synchronicities of all these different things that I have been wanting to bring into my life or have already been in my life but needed new fuel and new inspiration and new connections. And I was really keenly aware in buying the phone of me choosing my worth in the process. Not like, oh, I'm worth so much more because I have an iPhone, but like what I'm giving to myself, you know, because they have a price range and they have a, you know, longevity range and quality range, whatever. Like, there's all these things where it's like, I could buy the cheapest, simplest, most, you know, air quotes, basic iPhone, or I could buy this range of other options. And I didn't want to go extreme. I didn't want to buy the craziest one, but I was also aware, like, I was like, I told my sales rep. I was like, you can go take a lap. Like, I need a minute here to process. And I just like stood with my hands at my heart and my eyes closed in the middle of the Apple store, like connecting to my higher self and to God. And like, what is the right phone for me? I'm like, that may seem like the most ridiculous thing, but I could totally, it was so visceral, it was so palpable for me that what I was doing in that moment was like way more than buying an iPhone. Like, I was making a choice about what I get to have in my life. Like, I don't have to force limitation or suffering. Like, not like if I bought the more basic iPhone, I would have had suffering and limitation like on a big scale, but just the awareness of like, just because I think what I think about iPhones, and I think what I think about technology, and I think what I think about my life and technology and how those two should be relating, doesn't actually matter in this moment, because there is an alignment and there is a resonance that I can tune into around what is going to be most of service to me, which will then allow me to be most of service in my life, like be most aligned in my life so that I can do the most with my life. And so I just made my decision based on that. And there was even like, you can get 64 gigs, or you can get 128 gigs, or you can get 256 gigs, which is like so many gigabytes, it's outrageous. And I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. But I was like so torn between the 64 and the 128. And at the time, the 128 was like, whoa, that's too much. That's too big. Like, that's like psychic overload of like space. It's like, it's going to be like in my orb of like stressing me out that I have all this digital space hanging over my head. So I bought the 64 gig and was like, I have 2 weeks to return this. I think I'm ready to expand. Like, I just needed to like go through that process. And it's more about, like, there's this thing about possibility and potential there. Not like, oh, if I have 128 gigs, I can take 1 million photos and I can do this and the other. It's like, no, there's just this sense of, this is a tool. Like, what I'm starting to really feel in my life is this like filling up of, it's not a toolbox, but it's like a gathering, like into my basket, I'm gathering. Like, this is my like modern day gathering reality of like, I'm gathering the pieces that are coming forward with me into this new life that I'm creating. And so I'm going to be really intentional about what I put in that basket. And it may seem totally ridiculous that like a 64 gigabyte iPhone versus a 128 gigabyte iPhone, like, yeah, maybe that may be inconsequential, but there's sort of this feeling of like, no, actually I want to be the most attuned with each tiny little nuance and decision, because these are the tools that are coming with me to go forward to create something new. And I had that happen. I will stop talking after this. I had that happen after. It's so funny because I was like in the tub before this and was like, I don't even know what I'm going to talk about. Here it's just flowing, and it's raining today, and it's just today is like all about flow and water. But I bought this beautiful linen apron that's like a life apron, like a seamstress might wear it, or a gardener, or like you just wear it all the time. You have big pockets and you just wear it everywhere all the time. And I was like, I said to the woman when I bought it, I was like, have you ever bought anything that you feel like it's like your future self is like pulling you forward through this thing? Like, I'm buying this for the person that I'm growing into or who I'm becoming, but I'm not like quite there yet. Like, it's not total resonance for me to be wearing this apron all the time, but there's something about it. So I sort of like, that's the feeling intensely of the last week. And I don't know if you listened to Ann Ortley, but she was like, taking off like a rocket. I'm like, yep, definitely taking off like a rocket.
Yeah, that was it. It's, oh man, everything, like that process you went through with the iPhone, that's exactly what I went through with the car, right? And I mean, I had in my mind what I wanted. So what I wanted was this certain car But what I really want, like the things that were no deal, like what were deal breakers, the things that I had to have, or I needed to have space. It had to have a third row that like actually a car seat could fit in. So if I have another baby, I'm not getting another car, you know. And then it had to have a sunroof or a moonroof, because I was like, I have wanted a moonroof in a car for my entire life, and I have never had one. And every time it comes to this decision, it's like, well, this one's $1,000 cheaper. I'll just get it. It'll save us a little, you know, like that's the mentality, right? So the moonroof was my deal, like my thing. I'm like, I'm getting a freaking moonroof. And then I wanted just something that we could travel in. That was the thing. We looked at these SUVs that I wanted. We looked at so many cars, and I was proud of myself because I went way out of my comfort zone, like way out of the box. And there was not a single SUV. Even the super expensive ones, like the Chevy Suburbans that are enormous, they did not have as much room even as our minivan that we have now has. And so when we got to this, like Sam went to this dealership and he saw these, he's like, I really know that you don't want a minivan, because I was like, I'm not driving a fucking minivan. I just would not do it. You know, everybody kept suggesting it. I just would not do it. And he went there and he's like, I'm just going to show you some pictures, you know. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to be open, whatever. And because I'd already looked at the ones that I wanted, and they were just too small. And so I look at this and I'm like, oh, and he says, and it has a sunroof in it. And I was like, oh, okay. But it also has screens, like the ones we looked at had screens on the back of each seat, and it was like, it was too much, right? There was just like a lot, and there was a USB ports and all this stuff everywhere in the car. It was just like way too much stuff. And like I would look at the steering wheel and it was like overwhelming. But then we found this van, and it doesn't have the TVs in the back of the seat. It does have a screen like for the radio or whatever, and like a backup camera, which is my big thing. I was like, I do not want a backup camera. But the thing is like the way that this car is set up, the screen is just off unless you engage with it. So it's just like a black space on the dash, right? And so I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of okay. And then not only does it have a moonroof, it has freaking a moonroof over each seat. It's like this thing called a panoramic moonroof, is like takes up 2 seats, and then there's another one for the third row seat. So there's like all this space. And then I was like, I don't even know if this is safe for my children. So I like keep the thing closed now. It's really funny. But it's just, I don't know, it's just so cool. And another thing was the back seats of our old van, the windows did not roll down. And my daughter would always say, I want my window down. And we didn't have air conditioning in that van. And it was just so hot for the kids back there. Well, this has full-on huge roll-down windows in the back. So she was so excited. And there's just so much room. Like they could literally run around in the back there. We can travel, just do whatever. And not only is there like tons of space where the seats fold down, but there's space under the seats. Like so much room. We can store stuff when we travel. And that's one thing that we're calling in is more traveling with the kids. And so it works for that. Like it's just this perfect marriage, and it has so much versatility in it that we can use it for our daily life. We can use it for the markets when we go. We can use it for traveling, all of this stuff. But it was that same thing. I was sitting in that place, you know, about to spend more money than I've ever spent on a car or anything actually besides my house in my life. And I just went out to the car to nurse the baby, and I just sat there and I just said a prayer, and I said, whatever is in the highest good of not only me, but my family, that will get us to a place in our life where we can live the life that we want to live, and like whatever's for the highest good, just let that be. If we can afford this, let us do it. If we can't, I'll just walk away and it's fine. So I totally took my emotions out of it. And then it just like worked out. It all worked out. And not only did it work out, like our bank, there was some weird thing with our bank because they had given us a really good interest rate. But then every time we would go to a car dealership, they're like, no, they won't give you that. And they get like kickbacks from these other banks because ours is a credit union. So they want these other banks that aren't credit unions because they get kickbacks. So they would put us with other banks, and they would give us these super high quotes for interest and all this stuff. And so this car was going to be just ridiculous. And so they ended up doing this whole thing. And they were like, well, your bank for some reason they gave you a higher interest rate than this other bank that we went with. So, and we were like, this just doesn't make sense. So it turns out our bank called us and they had made a mistake and they had doubled the interest that they had promised us. So in return for this, they were like, all you have to do is wait 10 days and then get a payoff from that other bank. We'll pay them off. We'll give you half of what we told you. So we're getting like a 2% interest rate on this car. And they were like, and we'll extend your payment timeline by another 2 years. So we have like 9 years to pay this ban off, which is not going to take that. Like, we're going to pay it off way sooner. But and then they're like, there's no payoff penalty if you pay off early. And they said they were like, and they just did all. They were like, going to make our payment that we were wanting is actually going to be $100 less than what it was with, and so it just all worked out, because when I was in the car doing that prayer, I was like, this is the dollar amount that I'm willing to pay for that car, and I don't want to pay a penny more. And we actually ended up paying like double what I said, and I was like, what's going on? Like, I'm just going to go with this. But now with all those cuts, like from our bank, it's back to what I said. I didn't, like, they're cutting all this money off because we're not paying hardly anything in interest. We're paying like a third of the interest we would have paid. So it's this totally synchronistic thing, right? Okay, we're in alignment. All right, this is cool. And so it was just a big kind of testimonial for me of like just going with it and trusting, just really trusting. And something that you said reminded me of this feeling that I've been having since I turned 40. It was like I did a ceremony for myself in the bath with the water, and so yeah, water's totally happening for me too. And I had this feeling that I was finally, for the first time in my life, actually slowly slipping into my own pool. So I think I've told this story on here before about how my mentor said the reason that I get mad at like my mother-in-law is because I'm in their pool, meaning their energy frequency, and I'm trying to carve out my corner of their pool when I just need to create my own pool. And I was like, how do I create my own pool? Like, I don't know. This is the first time I actually in my body felt that. I was like, oh, I'm slipping into my own pool, and I'm still at the edge, but I'm like looking forward to just exploring all the space that I have in my own pool without all these rigid belief systems that I have to have. I can only drive a big truck or a classic car, or I can only do, all this stuff. And I was telling Sam, my partner, that this car is literally more technologically advanced than our house is. Like, we don't have a TV, or we don't even have Wi-Fi on our house. So this is way more technologically advanced than our house. And so the way I thought about it was, the car is the way that we go out into the world, out into the space where I don't really agree with like anything out there. And our home is our bubble. So I was talking to him about, what if we just create our home to be technologically not advanced, because I don't want any of that stuff. I mean, I'm happy with my food processor and my stand mixer. Those are like way more technology than I even use. But what if we just keep our house as we like it, which is, we don't want a lot of noisy things or a lot of, technology around. I definitely don't want a smart home. And then just the car is like the way that we enter into the world. And so it's more technologically advanced, because the truth is we are at a limit where we can't actually interact with the world unless we get on with some technology, right? Like, people, when I was talking to car dealers, they were like, you don't have a cell phone? I was like, nope. And they were like, how are we supposed to contact you? I was like, call my landline, like, you can email me, it's cool. But they don't even understand. It's so bizarre. And they're telling me all these features on the car, and I'm like, I really honestly don't care if it pairs with my cell phone. Like, that's just not going to happen. But yeah, it's this thing of just letting go of these beliefs that, like, because I am a person who loves to live with the earth and likes to get dirty and, plant my own garden and forage, that I can't also have some technology. And something that Sam learned when he went to Ep5, which is a natural building school, they would use like big, huge machinery to like dig out a pond, or to mine the clay that they were going to build these houses with. And people would come there super hardcore, like, oh man, why are you using technology? We should be digging this pit by hand, you know? And their whole thing was, no, we have access to this technology, so we need to use it for the greatest good. Like, if we can use this technology to build a pond instead of having to hand dig a pond, then we're going to do that, because it's an intelligent and thoughtful way to use technology. But we're not going to use it just to, like, completely clear off a piece of land and, like, you know, start from ground zero. So they have, like, their limits. Well, it's the same thing we found out with farming. Like, we were trying to be sustainable farmers, but what we realized is it wasn't actually sustainable. Anything that we're doing wasn't sustainable by us. Like, doing everything by hand wasn't sustainable for us as a family. So is it really sustainable farming just because we're, you know, like, should we get a tractor? And we haven't done any of that stuff yet, but we did start renting small walking tractors to, like, build our rows, because we were paying kids to dig these trenches and, like, build these rows. We were spending thousands of dollars, and it took 3 hours for this little walk-behind tractor to do the same thing it took them 3 days to do. So intelligent use of technology, right? Like, using it in the right space. So yes, I am moving beyond that technology is flat out evil and accepting that there's some good use for it. And I also am not going to become this person who's, like, sitting on my phone every 5-second break I get. I'm waiting on my kid at the pool and I'm on my phone, or I'm, you know, standing in line for something at the BMV and I'm on my phone. Like, I'm not going to ever become one of those people. I don't want to be that person. I want to actually sit there and take in the surroundings that I'm in. So I realize that just because I step into technology doesn't mean I have to have all of it or become the zombie.
Oh, yeah. Where that's taking me, and you said, I guess, the piece about technology, but also what you were talking about, like, slipping into your own pool. What the first thing that came to mind when you said that was embodiment, that I have been on this sort of, like, embodiment, not obsession, but, like, that's sort of, like, been whatever the pigeons, the homing pigeons, like, whatever, you know, their thing, like, that's, like, for me, I guess it's your target, right? So I'm aiming, my body is seeking embodiment, or I'm driving my energy towards that in all these different ways. And, like, really, you know, it's just this experience of being in your own energetics, like, wanting to, like, the issue with dogma and the issue with living solely, and I'm not saying that you were, but, you know, and I don't think most people do, but there's some level of embodiment for everybody with things, but, you know, living more by ideal and idea and intellectualized morality and value is that, I mean, that like, breeds hypocrisy, but it breeds incongruency and inconsistency, and it, you know, I think, like, that's why a lot of people have issues with Christians, like, why I always did. I was having this conversation recently about, you know, looking, like, remembering being in high school and going on, like, a church retreat thing, and all these, you know, like, popular, preppy, whatever, like, you know, the cliquey people of my high school espousing these Christian beliefs or ideas. I was like, but do you know how you act in school? You know, do you know, like, are you aware that what you're saying right now is complete bullshit based on, like, who you present as? And, I mean, we've all done that. We all do it. And not to cast judgment on them. And, you know, when they're in high school, it's like, it's a shit time for everybody. But, just, like, the only issue is it's not, like, having great ideals about things is great. You know, those ideas can pull us forward. But, the real issue is just that when it's not embodied. And, so really seeing that, you know, we cast a lot of judgment on the ego, because that's who's, like, running that train, you know, in terms of saying, like, oh, this is who I am, these ideas, I identify, this identity thing, I identify with this value or this way of being or these political views or whatever. But we end up, like, and if you see spiritual leaders who you can sense that from, like, the only issue is that on some level there's an overvaluing of the ideal and an undervaluing of the expression. And so really I think, like, what I'm seeing in myself is that the more embodied I become, the harder it is to hold dogmatic ideas or live by idealistic ideas, because by being in our bodies, we become so deeply in our resonance that it becomes harder and harder to do anything that is discordant, and so yeah, I'm totally in the process of embodiment and of, like, slipping into my own pool. And I worked with this woman yesterday. Her name is Danelle, and she was on the Medicine Stories podcast. I don't know if you listened to that one recently. I think it was maybe the most recent one, or not one of the most recent ones. But she has this business called Cervical Wellness, and it's like cervix as self, I think, is the name of the episode. And I had this totally amazing, crazy experience on the call with her, and it broke through these layers of dissociation I've had from my body and of being in my body. So when you're talking about, like, slipping in, it was like slipping down into my cervix and connecting with it. And what the message that came out was really so profound for me, but so illuminating about basically all of my life and, like, what I see happening in the world around us. And the message for me was that you are beautiful, you are precious beyond words. And I just kept holding that, like, I am precious beyond words, I am precious beyond words, and letting that infuse all of my cells. And I had to sit, like, it was the end of the call, and she was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm great, I just got to sit with this." And so I got off the call and I just sat for like 30 minutes feeling this, like, go into every part of my body and of my being and, like, fill my cells and bathe my cells. And thinking about it, in epigenetics and quantum physics, Joe Dispenza terms, like, bathing them in this environment, telling my whole being that I am precious beyond words. And the effect that had on me was beyond words. It's going to be hard to elaborate on this. But what I realized was that so much of my righteousness and so much of my struggle in the world, in dealing with people and connecting with people, in dealing with issues with people, and looking at the world and having all my, like, super intellectualized judgments or frustrations or whatever about the world, was coming from the fact that in some way I felt that I was dependent on that external environment for my worth, and that the world was not reflecting what I wanted to experience. And that the way people were interacting with me was, it's like everybody's doing something wrong. And as much work as I do, and I've done around my judgments and my blaming and all of that, like, I've made leaps and bounds here, but this piece, it, like, dissolved so much of that, because I realized, like, just the internalized, embodied experience of knowing that I'm precious beyond words made all of that stuff, like, so inconsequential, and it made all of that stuff everybody else's. So, like, whatever I'm dealing with person X or person Y or whatever, where I'm like, I can totally lay a case how they're doing everything wrong, right? And like, it makes total sense. And maybe objectively, they're doing a lot of things that aren't facilitating like a good fluid interaction or healthful, interaction. But so what? Like, what do I need to do in this situation to just honor that I am precious beyond words? Like, oh, I just need this. That's okay. I can deal that. I can do that, So it really, and it's funny because as soon as it gave me the ability to speak things, and like, oh, I just need to talk about this. Like, I don't need to sit in my little corner and stew about it and try to figure out the exact right way to respond to this situation. I can actually just say, oh, I actually don't know how to navigate this, and me not knowing how to navigate this has no bearing on my worth. Regardless, I'm precious beyond words. And so now I just get to go talk to that person, because the whole point now is about growth and about exploration and about healing things, because I don't want to be carrying shit around, and I don't want to be carrying around these projections and these limiting beliefs. And so it's really hard, like the more that, like we are all love, right? So the more that we are fully embodied, what are we going to embody? We're going to embody love. And so it's going to be harder and harder to throw out any of those judgments or blames or, force other people to live by your set of values.
Yeah, the part of that was big for me is that I would get, I guess it would, like, the whole world just has offended me for my entire life. Like, I'm just like, this is all so offensive and just terrible. And the part that I just have finally realized as I've gotten older in these last few years, definitely, is that just because something's happening doesn't mean I have to participate in it. Like, it's just out there happening, and I'm not being forced to participate in anything. I mean, a lot of times they do definitely try to force our hand, but I can also choose to participate in that or not, like the system, basically. And that's something that came up again with this car thing. The first car dealership we went to, they were just really pushing things, and like they keep you in these car dealerships for like hours. They're trying to break you. It's like some sort of like weird boot camp or something. They just will not let you out of there, And I was very aware of this. I'm like, okay, this guy is totally telling me all his stupid stories that I don't give a shit about, his imaginary kids and like his girlfriend or whatever, these stories that are going to make me buy this car from him. I know that they're all lies, or he's really stretching to try to get me to, I don't care. I don't care about this guy's life. I really don't. I just want to buy a damn car. And I don't need to be like friends with my car dealer. I just need somebody who is like going to be respectful of my time. So the first car dealer, he was not respectful of our time. We were there for like 4 freaking hours, and he kept coming back saying, well, the banks, like blaming it on the banks. And he'd go back in his office, and I'd watch him, and he'd just like sit there and shoot the shit with these guys. And I'm like, I know what you're doing. And so I'm like, I'm leaving. I'm taking my children and leaving, because they were melting down. Like, they're starting to cry, and I don't want to be in there. And then I thought, no, I'm just going to sit in here and let them listen to these kids cry. And so I just like brought the baby in there, and she's like screaming, and I'm like, yeah, we got to go. And he's like, I know you got to go, but. I'm like, no, we literally have to go. And the only problem in this situation is waiting on my partner to be on the same level. He's like, but, he gets hung up in that. He's like, but. And I'm like, no, we got to go. And so we just like walked out. And they were really like upset and kept calling us, and I'm like, no, we're not gonna. And then we find out they just totally lied to us about a bunch of stuff. And so I'm like, well, see, that's why we were just supposed to leave. Like, they were just keeping. And then the next one we went to, the guy, I mean, I could totally tell he's being fake as well, but he's like, do your girls want anything to drink? Do you need anything? Like, here, let me bring another chair for your daughter to sit in also, so she doesn't have to sit on your lap, like, and be uncomfortable. Here, let me do that, like, all of these things. And then I left, when we went to sign the papers to buy the car, I left the baby in the car to sleep because she was asleep. I was like, I'm not taking her in there and waking her up. So I go in there and I was just going to go back and forth and check on her. Well, I got like lodged in this tiny room and I couldn't like get out as quickly and easily, but I felt her wake up and I was like, okay, I got to get out of here. And I was trying to get out and the car dealer runs in and he's like, baby's awake. And I was like, I felt that. And so I like go out and like, he was like watching out for me, you know? So I was like, okay, I at least know that this guy is trying to be, you know, accommodating to me as a mother, which is great. I totally appreciate that. So anyway, I don't know what the whole point of that was, but I guess it's just that, oh yeah, that was it, that I have always felt like I had to, like before I would have felt, well, this guy's being really nice and helpful. I have to buy this car from him, you know, like I have to buy this car from him. Oh my God, this car is so expensive. I have to find a way to pay for this car so I can buy it from this guy right now, you know, like that's totally would have been me. And now I'm like, no, I don't have to do shit that I don't want to do. I don't have to participate. And like another big thing that I just did, which is for people who know me, this is like a really big deal, is I just went and got a new driver's license that's an Ohio driver's license. I've lived here for 5 years. I keep going back to Oklahoma. I've gone back and gotten my driver's license because I refuse to give up that I'm from Oklahoma, right? But I went in there and I sat in there and it was a whole like another thing. It was another shit show. I get up there and there was one piece of paper I didn't have, so I had to leave and come home and do it. And I really was, at that time when I came up against it, I was like, I'm just not going to do this. I'm just going to keep my driver's license, da, 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 da. But I was like, no, I'm going to participate in this way because this will make things easier for us and for our business and all of these things. There's all these other ways that I'm disempowered because I don't have this stupid driver's license. Like I can't register my kayak. And so I'm waiting around on Sam to go register my kayak with the title place. And so I can't go kayaking. I'm like, what? I've been waiting for like 3 years. He's never going to do this. So why don't I just get my damn driver's license and register it myself? So yeah, realizing that I can participate in the ways that I want to, and not, even though the rule is stupid that I have to register my stupid kayak, like I can still choose to participate in that because it's going to get me what I want, and that's fine. And it doesn't mean that I am like going to become the antithesis of who I am and like just participate in things because I want to live some certain lifestyle or whatever. I don't want to lose my creature comfort, so I'm just going to go along with whatever any kind of like fascist bullshit anybody throws at me or something. So yeah, nuance.
Total nuance. Yeah. Well, that brought up something that came up the first time you were talking that I didn't get to, but about how we have this, like we can't see all the details of the big picture that we're aiming for. And, you know, we don't know the steps on the path to get there. And so I think, at least I know that I've done this, and I suspect other people have as well, where we say, like, this is the goal, this is where I'm aiming, and because it looks this way, anything that I don't think is going to get me there, like, that doesn't look the way I think things should look on the path to that, like, I'm going to say no to. And I think for me, that's been a lot of fear around getting it wrong and then being cast out from the kingdom, which is total, like, you know, childhood trauma, like religious indoctrination, whatever thing. Like I remember being in fifth grade, I think, and being like, I can't swear because God's going to be mad at me. Because like all my friends were swearing as like little 10, 11-year-olds. Which is like all across the board now. I remember when that was such an anomaly. And now it's like kids, everybody. Anyway, it's all these podcasters who drop F-bombs. It's just all over the place.
Oh man, I distinctly remember the first time I said a cuss word. It was the word shit. And I was with my cousin and he was like, I don't know, doing some grotesque thing with like a frog or something, like mutilating it or something, because boys are weird. And I remember hearing him cuss and I was like, I'm going to cuss. And I was like, shit. Ooh, that felt good. And then I got to the F-bombs and like, that's my favorite word. I love dropping F-bombs because it feels so good. And my mom would always be like, stop talking like that. It's terrible. I was like, if it's so terrible, why does it make me feel so good? It makes me feel really good. Like, get it out. Like, get all this frustration out or like this power out or something. It's so funny.
Oh, that is funny. Well, okay. Where was I going with that?
being cursed by, and God's going to be mad at you.
Right, God's going to be mad at me. Right. So, that, like, carrying with me my whole life, this, like, I have to make the exact right decision, and I have to know exactly what to do before it's actually really feasible that I would know, because I don't have all the information, but somehow I'm supposed to, like, stealthily get information so that nobody knows that I don't know, or doesn't know that I don't have the information, which is, like, I've just been doing this, like, in the past few months with several life situations that have come up. And so after I had this, like, cervical healing yesterday, I was like, oh, no, I don't know how to navigate this thing, so I'm going to just tell this person I need to have a conversation with them around it so that I can make some headway here, because I'm actually not making any headway on my own. I'm just, like, in my own isolated little bubble, like, with my thought loops. Like, okay, I'm going to not do anything at all until I do the exact perfect right thing that nobody can, like, get mad at me about or blame me for, or, like, I'm not going to step on anybody's toes or offend anybody, or, you know, whatever. It's like, that's not ever going to happen. But so I've, like, done a lot of knowing in my life journey of, like, well, this isn't it, and that's not it, so no. And I, like, you know, block these things. And I think it happens often that we are like, I want expansion, I want this big vision, I'm going to this big dream, and then this thing comes in, and you're like, I don't think that's the thing for the dream. And so you kick it out, and you're like, no, but that was God, like, knocking on the door, trying to get you to say yes to your dream. Like, this is part of the process. Like, so for me, it's the phone, for, you know, and, like, upgrading my gigabyte here. And for you, it's this, like, brand new fancy triple sunroof car. And it's like, you know, going back to what you were talking about with, you know, maybe having a huge house someday in that other podcast. And it's not like God wants you to have a huge house and, like, you're so special and God wants you to have this huge house. It's like, no, it's just what we set our intentions for and what we believe we're worthy of and what we can do with it. Like, you know, if I'm going to continue to receive, then I'm going to receive a lot. You know, if I'm going to open to receiving, then I will be a recipient.
Yeah.
And so, really seeing how I've definitely, I've done that a lot. And I see that too, like, it occurred to me at some point this winter around relationships, how, like, there is one kind of relationship that I want to have. And you know, I'm supposed to be the magnet, and I'm supposed to, like, be the person who I want to be in a relationship with, and so, like, I don't want to, like, sleep around, I don't want to go on a bunch of dates. It's just, like, I have to open my field so that I can randomly bump into whoever this person is, you know? And, like, while that happens all the time and it's totally legitimate, I have told myself that I'm only allowed to have one kind of experience, and if I do anything that I think deviates from the path of that one experience, I'm telling the universe, like, I actually don't want that, and I'm going to go do this thing over here. And so then I'm basically, like, cutting out all these doors of possibility for how meandering and circuitous and non-linear this path is. It's like, I'm saying, no, there's a linear path to it. I'm starting at point A and I'm ending at point B, and it's a straight line in between. Like, actually, that is not how life works at all. And by dogmatically adhering to that out of fear that, like, I don't know, I'm not going to have the thing that I want, I'm blocking, like, all these other potentials, right? So fortunately with the phone, there's, like, way less, you know, attachment around it. And, like, I have, you know, I don't know where a 128 gigabyte phone is going to take me that a 64 gigabyte phone isn't going to take me. But I have this sense that, like, there needs to be more space available for whatever that is. Like, I have no idea what I'm going to create. But if I don't receive the space, like, if I don't receive like it feels like, yeah, 64, maybe 64 feels tight and contracted and limiting and scarce, and maybe that's a head thing. And maybe I'm just telling myself that 128 feels like more spacious and more expansive. But I had a totally different experience in the store where I was like, 128 is way too much. It's too big. It's too much space. It's cosmic psychic overload. And 64 was like, I don't need that much. I'm okay with less. I don't, and it was like the whole storyline around it. And now it's totally flipped. And so it's like, yeah, 64 probably is fine. I don't know. But even as I say that, I'm like, yeah, it's not though. It's not, because there's something bigger that's being asked of me that has nothing to do with my phone, like on a life scale. Like the phone is going to be a tool for that maybe somehow, or maybe not, or maybe like it's just a random like
it's symbolic. It's symbolic. Yes. It's like inviting more space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a universal law. The universe always clears space before it brings something in, right? So it's kind of it is symbolic. That too much thing, that was something I went through too. I had a really great weekend with a bunch of friends, and we had a cookout and just a wonderful time. We stayed up way too late, and then the next day we had these other new friends come over, and there was a lot of esoteric conversation. And Monday I had a migraine, and then we had to go to the car, and I really had a migraine. I couldn't see. I was really sick. It was not my best self. And so I thought, what is going on? And so Tuesday morning, I got up and the headache was still lingering, and I decided I was going to write about it and see what the deal was. What is the headache? And it was too much. That's the thing that kept coming out. And this is something I say as a mother all the time. It's too much. It's too much noise. It's too much work. It's too much. Too much going on, I don't go anywhere because it's too much. This swimming lessons thing, it's too much. It's all too much. The car was too much. There's blue lights on the dash. It's too much. Just all this stuff. And so I really came to this thing around it. Okay, well, if I just keep saying it's too much, then I'm not going to get shit that I want. And then the other thing too about abundance is that when we're called to something or drawn to something, it's because it's for us. So my partner is really called to having a lot of money, and I am called to the lifestyle to a lifestyle that requires a lot of money, I think, but I actually don't even kind of know, because my thinking on what I would actually use that money for is really one thing, and that's to buy a ton of land. And that's kind of my partner's thinking too. We're we just want to own so much land. So I'm for a long time I went around with this question, why do I want so much money? Am I gonna buy all this stuff, a yacht, and wear my thong out on the yacht and all this stuff? I'm oh, that's not what I would use the money for. Okay, well, what would you use the money for? I just buy a shit ton of land. I'd still live in I did live in a hand-built house that we had time to actually build ourselves, and I would still live on the land and do everything, but I'd have a ton of land, and land is expensive, so I do need a ton of money. So, if we're thinking these things, then it's because it's for us. So, I'm a queen. I need a entire land to rule over, so I have to buy a bunch of land. And it's interesting, that I kept coming up with that thing of too much, too much, too much. And I was all right, well, if everything's too much, then I'm not going to get anywhere near, and it's very interesting too, because my partner deals with the same thing, not saying too much, but in the same way necessarily, but he gets really triggered when people try to take our money kind of thing, the car thing was a really big trigger for him, because he's man, I feel I just got roofied and I just gave this guy all my money, and what just happened? And it's so funny because it's so tangible for him. It's there's this money and they just took it from me and I can't see it anymore. And for me it's more an energetic thing, but yeah, I don't know. That too much thing it's interesting. Definitely, I think they call that an upper limit problem. So you're getting to the next level, and you got to deal with this stuff that's keeping you from getting to that next level, and open up yourself, open up all your space to receive.
Well, it's overwhelm. And my former teacher, she would say that, overwhelm is it's not real. It's just mental overlay, and that, and I've had that kind of awareness hitting me recently around clarity, because I kind of think they're the same. Like for me, overwhelm, the too muchness is like, oh, I'm putting all this pressure on myself that there's some way that this is supposed to be happening, or like I'm supposed to have the right answer without all the information. And so I'm like stuck in this thing, and it all just feels like too much. Like there's too many things to figure out, too much to handle, too many people to please, too many angles I can look at this from. And so it's super overwhelming. And so then my whole life feels super overwhelming. It's like, okay, so then this is all the illusion. All of this. Everything that I experience that is not clarity is the illusion. Because the clarity is the distillation, and it's the truth. And it's the, like, I can check in with my body and know immediately what my reaction to something is. Like, I'm like, should I have this conversation with this person? My body goes, or it's like, yes. It's like, so I could go through a bunch of mental looping around it and, say, well, I could see how this is like this and that's like that. And maybe, if I approach it from this angle, it might have this effect. And then it's like, oh, it's too much. It's too much to have this conversation. It's too much to have to be able to handle this, to do this, to have the right answer. And I'm currently actually I'm in the midst of that right now, trying to figure out how to respond. It's been like 5 days now that I've been trying to figure out how to respond to somebody, and it's because, like, if I initiate, if I'm like stepping out into the world, that first step, it's like, this is my step. I can do this. And I step towards my dream with the trajectory in mind and the endpoint in mind. And then I get feedback from the world immediately. And that feedback throws my brain into total chaotic mess meltdown. Because then I'm like taking on all of that, and so it's all this overwhelm. It's all too much. It's too much to interact. It's too much, like you're talking about, like too much to leave the house, too much to do any of these things, because I'm not in my own pool, right? Because I'm suddenly swimming and drowning in everybody's pool and all of the mess and all of the energetics of everybody else and everything else, which of course comes back to, like, how do we hold our charge? How do we stay in our own pool and carry that with us everywhere we go? How do we live embodied? And that's the end game of being embodied. It's like, I can be me and carry myself with me and be at peace everywhere I go all the time.
Yeah, and when we're embodied, that's the thing too, is like, I'm just realizing this as you're saying this, because I do that too. Like the whole thing I was talking about, hanging out with these friends, it just spun me out. There was so much in my head, and just replaying things and all this stuff, and it's like trying to figure all that out up here in the head, instead of just letting it sink into the body or letting it go away wherever it goes. I think that is a key thing for why overwhelm happens. And for me especially, it's trying to, like, my mind is like Tetris. I'm always trying to fit all the puzzle pieces together, and part of that's fun for me. Like, that's just my brain enjoys doing that kind of stuff. I like puzzles. I like putting things together, and also I have to leave space for it's like knowing the end game. I don't have to figure out the whole path. Like, I just have to keep my eye on the prize, and the path will appear before me. And instead of getting into all the headspace of like figuring out how to do it, that always kills everything for me, getting into that headspace, because it becomes too overwhelming, or because my brain doesn't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, it's not everything is logic. Sometimes it's just like free falling and trusting that the universe is going to present things to you. I mean, like the car, I just bought this car.
You just froze. I don't know if I'm frozen.
Do you see me now?
Yeah.
Okay. But just, the car is a good example of just trusting that it was all going to work out and not worrying about how I'm going to figure it out, like just trusting that we're going to continue to make money because we do, we're working and every day we make money instead of just all of a sudden, like, the money is going to disappear. There's not going to be any flow coming in. So the brain thing, trying to think it through, it just messes things up. So being embodied, I think that's the key. I think that's the theme of this show, is being embodied.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think what happens, at least I experience this, is, you're in this hypervigilant state of using your brain to try to deal with the entirety of life, and letting go of that. It's like I remember like 8 years ago, I went through this big transformation, and it was the first time that I really got conscious of like myself and my thoughts and my words, my actions, and really started to just be for myself, like living for myself, honoring myself, loving myself, really cultivating a relationship with myself. And so I was allowing all of my experience to happen. So all of my emotions, and I was just opening to the whole thing and letting things flow and not getting stuck in like mental ruminations around it. And I would tap into these states of bliss, of just like total joy and peace that were completely unrelated. Like I was going through this extremely painful breakup, and by the outside, I could have been in a lot of suffering, but I was just, because I was allowing all this flow through me, I was able to get to these states of like, I am doing amazing, and there's no reason that I should be doing amazing right now, but I'm like so good, I'm so happy. And then I would have days and moments where I was just like hurting and feeling like it was so hard, and I just couldn't get there. I couldn't get myself to go to that place of bliss and peace. And it became really clear to me that I was like, this is the moment before the breakthrough. Like this, like really, it's like the really rough edge, and it's, like you're hacking through the brush, and it's right before you get to the clearing, and it feels so much harder than any other point of that process. And so it's like that threshold between the mind and the heart, or the mind and the body. It's like when you're stuck in your mind, it's terrifying to even think about dropping down into your body, because so much of that process is like the ego death, like you're letting all these things fall away that are telling you that they're keeping you safe. And it's like it doesn't get clearer and clearer and clearer until you're there. And so you just have to have faith that this process of dropping into your body is going to take you to someplace completely different, because that entire deep dive process, all you can see is what you're letting go of. And then as soon as you totally release into it and you are in your body, the experience is completely unrelated to the egoic experience that you were just having, and you are in peace. And it's not the idea of peace, you're experiencing peace. But it's always that tricky threshold to navigate of really like letting go of what your mind wants to tell you about something. And the bigger, I don't think that this is abnormal, but the bigger the stakes are, the higher the stakes, the bigger the attachment, the harder it is to get down into that distilled clarity. But it's like all of this whole big cloud, this whole thing hanging over you, these mental ruminations and everything, that's all the illusion, the obscuring, that the underlying piece that if you do drop into your body is there. You don't have to work for it. It's like, I feel like my experience is like my mind can't feel. And so my mind can't feel what the peace would feel like. And so my mind is convinced that it doesn't exist. Because they're like operating on two different planes of reality, of experience.
Yeah. I have been trying to figure out lately, probably like for a couple months now, I'm trying to figure out what the actual purpose of the ego is. And so I read like spiritual texts all the time, and nobody ever addresses this. It's just like check your ego kind of thing, or like some people say get rid of the ego, which I don't even think is possible. But I'm just wondering, so I don't know, do you have any ideas about what it's for? I don't understand why we have it. And the only place that I can go to where I find it to be of value, or yeah, I guess of value or of use, is like as a creator, like as an artist, creating. I can see how the ego fuels this like beautiful expression, right? Like whenever you're a performance artist, for example, and you can just create these beautiful things. And I feel like that is, I mean, it's soul, but it's also, there's a lot of ego involved in that, to be able to get up there on stage and like perform. Like one time I did this performance art piece with these women, and we were topless and we just had our breasts painted. And it was like at this, like gay pride sort of weekend thing, Diversifest or something like that is what it's called. And I was on this stage, just like dancing on this stage with these women with totally topless with my boobs painted. And I was like looking, all of a sudden I had this realization. I just looked out in the crowd and I was like, here I am standing on stage topless in front of all of these strangers. I was like, well, at least most of them are gay men. They don't really give a shit. So, but like, and then I walked off, and I just thought, like, I always think about that now. I was like, that was totally my ego. Just like, yeah, just get up there. You can do it. So I think that there's some value in that, like it was a good experience for me. That was what I did for my 30th birthday. Went to a nude drawing session where I was the figure model, and then I danced on stage with my tatas hanging out everywhere. So, yeah. So I don't know what the purpose of the ego is besides getting us into things like that.
Well, maybe this is conflating two different things, but I would make the association between like your analytical mind, like thinking about how Joe Dispenza talks about it, that your analytical mind and your ego are sort of, I would think, the same thing, and maybe there's nuance to that, but that this egoic part of us is the part that it's like our bond to the three-dimensional world, that if I am totally devoid of ego, I just am. Like I am just, like thinking about Eckhart Tolle's experience of awakening, where he was like, had divine intervention, was awakened, and then sat on a park bench for 2 years, just in presence. Like, zip ego. He was just there, fully present. And like, that's a beautiful place to be, but it actually, like, you experience the richness of life through that way of being. You can, because it's all experience, but it's like the way a baby experiences, just like soaking it in and just being with what is. And so you're not in separation, you're not in conflict, you're not in judgment or projection, like you're not in any of that stuff, but you're also not dynamically experiencing it. And so I think, like, my thought around it at this moment is that our ego is really this like incredible gift, because it is what facilitates the dynamism of this human experience. And it's a critical piece of being incarnate on this earth plane as a human being, because like there's obviously like the low vibrational aspects of it, and the blame, projection, the over-identifying with identities of any kind, and the like projection of what everybody else is supposed to be identifying as or being or whatever. But there is a way of using it and relating to our own ego that is like 5D informed, where it allows us to like express, like you're talking about, like, yeah, maybe that is what got you on stage doing that, and like making the choice for yourself for how you were going to celebrate your 30th birthday. And it's what gets you to lock into something that you want and go for it. It's like, it's the way, it's like our personal unique expression of divinity is maybe like the highest vibrational aspect of our ego. And the ego is just problematic when we overly identify at the expense of like our soul and our truth. And we think that all we are is our ego. And actually, all we are is our deep truth soul, and the packaging that comes in that we get to experience is ourself with our ego. So, because if we're all the same, like we're all one, right? We're all made of the same thing. We're all of God. We are all God expressed. So how does God experience God's self? It's through the ego, through the individuality of all the unique expressions that we came in to be. And I listened to this Lifestylist podcast recently, last week, that Luke Story did. There was a solo cast. It was him recorded at Paleo FX, and it was like his talk that he did there. And it was about consciousness. And he said something that really, I'm always so impressed with him. I'm like, oh, I don't want to listen to a solo cast. I hear him talk all the time, and so I don't ever listen to him. But he's really like, the way he expresses things is really helpful for me. But he was talking about how what if we could, like, if everything is God and God only has to, God created polarity so that God could experience all the many facets of God's self, then it's all God and it's all part of the experience and the expression of divinity. And so our ego, like our low ego, wants to be in conflict and create division and latch onto the polarity and the duality and make one right, make one wrong, make one good, make one bad, be on the right side of the fence. And what if we could actually just recognize the deep truth that since everything is God, then everything is perfect as it is. And so we can be, and if God is love and everything is an expression of God, then everything is an expression of love. And if we could be in that state of love with everything, then we could love all reality for what it is, exactly as it is. And then we can do that while being our unique divine expression of this one facet of that reality, which would be our ego, but at the highest vibration.
Yeah. Yeah, I listened to a talk by this priest named Sean O'Lear, and he said kind of a similar thing, but just that each individual is an expression of God. And so I have been thinking about that, and when I was at this gathering over the weekend, I was thinking about that, and there's this guy there, and he's a really cool guy. I like him a lot because he asks tons of questions about things that I actually want to talk about. So it's the only man that I know who is so fascinated by birth and how it happens and what our experience as women is of birth. He's just like a baby when he asks you these questions, just he's so into it, And so we just talked for hours, a few women and him, and mostly me talking, because I was just sharing, I have these, what I feel like are really epic birth stories that were totally fun for me. And people don't usually get to hear those kind of birth stories. Unfortunately, there's a lot of, when you start talking with people about birth stories, there's a lot of scary birth stories, or people, implanting fear in there about why you should do it this way or that way. And so I like to talk about my birth stories because they're totally fun. But I was thinking about it during that time, because all these people are talking, we're sitting around, and I am really enjoying everybody and all their different and all their different expressions and how they're all what they're all saying, and it's just like such a riveting conversation. I love talking about really big stuff, but then I was wondering, like, is anybody else feeling this same way? Like, is everybody else getting charged up, or is it just him and I getting charged up? And like, I don't even know if he's actually getting charged up because he's kind of drunk right now. So like, maybe it's just like, am I just like in this thing by myself here with all these people? And then I started, in that moment, I was able to tap into that this is, everybody is being their own expression of God. And then we started talking about that, and I don't know, it's just such an interesting thing to me that we're all an expression of God, and I think, are there like boundaries to that, or parameters to that, or like when I see this like lethargic, fat, bloated human being going down the street, like, is that an expression of God, like the one creator that made everything perfect, or is that like the ego's impression of impression upon the expression of God, like that the outer has impressed upon the inner, or something. I don't know if that makes sense, but like, what is that? And I struggle with that, and that's where I get really into judgment. And my thing with judgment is like, I don't care if I'm judgmental, because I never hold my judgments really against people. I'm like, yeah, I'm judging you, but it doesn't matter, because I'll still be kind to you and like be your friend, maybe, if we are vibing on the same level. But I like to look at my judgments and see like what's the lesson in that. And a lot of times I think that's like a lesson for me to not go there. Like, that's like a parameter I've set for myself, like, oh, I don't want to be like that, so I'm going to turn and go this way, kind of thing. But I do wonder, because my family and I, my partner and I, like, we really view our role as being parents and creators of humans, that what we're doing is we're creating, really, like, in the truest form of this word, like, we're creating the next elite. So I'm not talking about creating the next Bill Gates or whatever, but it's like, we always joke, it's kind of like eugenics or something, except for like, this is like eugenics, like spiritual eugenics or something, instead of like the way that we think Bill Gates does it. But it's like, we're trying to create the highest order of human beings, right? So that whenever all the bullshit falls away and like all these people like fade out and die, that like the next people who inherit the earth are the meek. They're the people who are of the earth. They're people who are living in alignment with God, creator, the one being, and that are really in touch with their own soul. And so, I don't know, like, I don't know where I'm even going with this, but other than I just have this, I always have this confusion around this thing of like, and maybe I shouldn't even say confusion, maybe I don't need to figure it out, but like, what is actually the expression of God, and what is like our human fucked up way of being that's like ruining God's expression. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. That probably will sound really shitty to some people, but I really don't care, because that's how I feel. So I'm just going to say that like, I really look around at a lot of people. I'm like, wow, you're really fucking it up. Like, you're really fucking up your life. And like, I have no sympathy for you, because I work really hard at my spiritual game, and I work really hard to create a life that's beautiful and like in alignment with God. And I know that I think everybody can do it, but I've recently been informed that not everybody can do it. And then ultimately, I guess that the thing that I land on every time is that everything is perfect, and they didn't come here for what I came here for. And I know what I came here for. I came here for power, and I came here to create children who are what I consider to be the elite, like the true elite, like as real humans, human being, higher universal mind. So yeah, it's all perfect.
Well, yeah, what that's making me think is, like, we have, well, it's funny, we were reading the book that we were reading in our book club. They were all from, these women all from mystery schools. And I think that everything is perfect. I've used that for myself in the past, and there's an element of that is helpful. And like the way Luke's story phrased it was was helpful for me to hear. But what has kind of really taken the forefront for me in the last year and a lot more recently is the mystery, is that like I was talking to a friend about science, and I've really had a hard time with science the last few years, and which is funny because I also then got like really into quantum physics. So it's in science. But it just kind of it got me clear kind of where I stand with it, or where I go with this. And it's not that, like, there's nothing wrong with trying to figure out the way things work and wanting to understand the way things work. But what my friend was saying was that, like, real science, the real scientific method, like a true scientist is somebody who is open-minded and who remains curious and who has the beginner's mind, which is a spiritual, like, spiritual teaching, like always have the beginner's mind. And what that does is it reserves a lot of space for the unknown. It reserves a lot of space for possibility and a lot of space for the mystery, and for the fact that I may figure out A through Y, but Z is always just going to be this unknown piece. And I think the unknown piece is way bigger than that. And like I think about that, and I think about how, I haven't studied the way people used to live, and indigenous people, and like traditional ways of living. I haven't done deep study on that, but just from knowing of, reading stories, like I like reading some, there's like children's books that have been made around traditional stories, and I like reading those to my daughter because I just way prefer those stories over modern children's books usually. But they all tap into the mystery. There's no story that has all pieces and parts of it figured out. And it's like these myths and legends, or like I bought, coming back from Hawaii, I went through Phoenix, I think. And so I bought this book at the airport that was like what's called like how Coyote made the stars or something, like that clever coyote shot his arrows and went up and like discovered to the moon, and then he discovered that he could shoot his arrows at the stars and move them around wherever he wanted to, and he created all these shapes and of all his animal friends. So there's bear and there's deer and there's like all, so coyote made the constellation. So the story, like, yes, you could scientifically, perhaps, maybe they have, I don't know, I don't study astronomy, like know how these shapes were formed. But isn't it also so beautiful to think that a coyote did this, or to think that there is some greater hand that made beauty just because, like, we may understand the science behind like why a rainbow reflects the colors in the way that it does, or why sunsets are what they are. Like, there's all this science to understand, the science of it. But it's just such an incomplete picture, because I don't like I don't feel like there's anything that you can actually know objectively, because the only objective truth is love. The only objective reality that exists is love, and everything is this mutable expression of that. And living with mystery is so much more spacious than living with answers. Living with the question is so much more spacious than the answers. And I may have quoted this before on this podcast, but I've quoted it a lot. Raina Marie Rilke wrote at one point, his name is so hard for me to say, such a tongue twister, but he wrote at one point, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but basically, like, live the questions. Like, we are here to live the questions, and perhaps one day, and we're here to live everything. And if you live the questions, perhaps one day you will live into the answers. And that it's like those answers will come into us inside of us, into our own deep knowing about things. But and it's not that we can't figure out things. It's not that we haven't figured out things about how the human body works. And like I'm into learning about nutrition and pro-metabolic eating and iron and whatever. Like I'm doing that stuff too. But I think that again comes back to the ego thing. Like we can do all that and explore, and like the ego is this beautiful thing that gets us to ask the questions, that gets us to engage with life, with the questions, with reality, with what we want to know, with what's pulling us forward. But if we think that it's the complete story, then it's really, really suffocating, I find. And I find I have a really hard time connecting with people who live in this very linear three-dimensional plane, because that space, the space of possibility, the space of mystery, the space of that unknown, like, is so almost non-existent. It's so suffocated out of it. Where somebody thinks that they have all the answers because they've done all the research and that this is it, cut and dry, black and white. I don't think that works in their paradigm and their reality, but I don't think that that's like the actual reality, and that that's how life actually is, like on a absolute way.
Yeah, living in the mystery. I love those children's books too. Those are like all of my daughter's children's books, because there is a reverence there too that doesn't assume that we are the creators of everything. It's like, oh yeah, like a coyote could have created that. And then the thing too, like I was thinking about when you said the rainbow. So maybe we know how scientifically how the rainbow is formed, but like, why? Why is the rainbow formed? We don't know that. We don't know why that, because it's freaking beautiful. Like probably, I don't know, like we don't know why that rainbow is there. Like what's the purpose of it? Because does a rainbow serve any purpose other than to be just glorious and like make you love life every time you see one? I don't know of any other scientific purpose, but I always like that. I've always had this, I can't remember if one of my teachers told me this or what, but about the rooster crowing the sun light up. So this idea that the sun wouldn't rise if the rooster, and I say this to people a lot, and it's like, yeah, but then what if you don't have a rooster? And it's like, well, there's a rooster somewhere that's like crowing before the sun. And it's always funny to me because my roosters start crowing at like 4 a.m. before the sun ever even peaks. And so I like that, having that visual of like, all right, here they are, they're crowing the sun up. But just having that, even if we knew the scientific reason, like, do we have to know that? Like, do we have to know? Like, why does the rooster actually crow every morning? What's the purpose? Like, can't the magic just be that it's crowing the sun up? And isn't that beautiful to live in that magic? That's something I've really been really investing in with my family, is magic. Since I had my daughter, I just decided that I want to live in a magical world. I look out there and it's not very magical. I want to live in a magical world. So how am I going to make that happen? I want my daughter to grow up in a magical world. Part of how I make that happen is that I spend a lot of time in nature, because magic happens in nature. But another thing that happens is that I create the magic. So little things that I can do that are going to make my daughter feel the magic. We do. Like, we made fairy cakes, and we went and left these little fairy cakes under the tree, and the fairies ate the fairy cakes. And my daughter was like, do you think that a raccoon ate it or the fairies? I'm like, no, girl, the fairies ate those cakes. Like, somebody ate the cakes. They left the wrappers out there, but they ate the cakes. Like, it's got to be the fairies. And, people can say, well, the fairies don't exist. It's like, well, yeah, but I know people who see them, and I see things. Like, so maybe, maybe they don't exist to you, but they don't exist to you because you don't believe in them. And the same thing happened with leprechauns. So one morning, on like a few days before St. Patrick's Day, which we don't like celebrate St. Patrick's Day. We're not Irish. It's not like our thing. But a few days before, my daughter woke up and she was in a really bad mood. And we were sitting down having breakfast, and instead of just like going through the whole thing with her, I just was like, oh my gosh, do you know what I saw when I was feeding the chickens? And she was like, what? I was like, I saw a leprechaun out in the barn. and I think it left something for you. And she was like, what? And so I was like, yeah, you need to like eat your food and get ready for the day and go out there and see what. And she was totally into it. She's like, what's a leprechaun? We talk about leprechauns and that they leave pots of gold and all this stuff. So then I was able, like, then it became a thing. She was totally into it. So Sam and I got into it. And so we were like, okay, where's a box that she's never seen before? So we found this little wooden box that she's never seen before. And I put 4 quarters in there, and I put a little green gemstone in there. And I went and I hid it in the barn. And I was like, go out there to the barn and like see if you can see where this leprechaun was out. Well, she like searched and she found this box, and then she's like, oh my gosh, it was a whole big thing. And I'm pretty sure that she knew that like it was me, but also like she was like, yeah, I'm going to get into this. She was so willing to just get into it. And so then we did the fairy cakes, and we just do things like this all the time. And then I also try to, when I am experiencing magic myself, which happens a lot, I try to like express what I'm feeling and like share that with her so that she sees magic. So one example of that is when I was first had the baby and it was winter, the trees, I looked outside the window, I sat in this one chair and nursed all the time. And I just had this one view out the window, and it would just get so boring. And I was looking out the window, and the sun came and hit the ice on these trees in just this way that all of a sudden I had this realization of how we got freaking Christmas lights. I was like, what are Christmas lights? Why do people use Christmas? But I looked at these trees, and they were millions of different colors, all these colors glimmering on these trees. And I had never seen anything like this before, never in my life. And I was just like, oh my God. And so I made this huge big deal out of it. And it was funny because my mom was here, and I was like, have you ever seen anything like this? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, well, get out of here because you suck. This is glorious. And so we like went outside and tried to take pictures, and it was this whole beautiful thing. And so now every time that the light glimmers on the trees from the rain or whatever, my daughter is like, Mama, the lights are back. And it's a whole big thing. And it's like these little, like, who doesn't want to live like this? It's a totally glorious way to live instead of being like, oh yeah, that sun, it's shining on the lights and it's reflecting the water droplets and making it, like, I don't even know. It was magical, and I would rather live in the magic and the mystery than live in some boring, logical, have everything figured out way. And so I hope by the time I am a grandmother that I am just totally batshit crazy to everybody, and I'm just living in the magic all the time, and there are little elves dancing around me, and yeah, that's my goal in life. So
well, I think, I've heard I don't know if it was in What the Bleep Do We Know, but I've heard like the scientists who are really engaged with the exploration and the unknown and the curiosity. There are people who go through science and find God because they approach it from this place of wonder and curiosity. And when you discover how all these things work together to happen, you're like, how is this? This is incredible that all of these tiny, like you could go into the intricacies of, how the human body works, or how anything works, or how a plant takes up nutrients or whatever, and really approaching the scientific discovery and the information that you're getting with the awe, because it's really about awe. It's about the reverence and the awe and the wonder, which is not antithetical to science. It's just often missed in the sort of fragmented way that the way it gets focused. I think a lot of times in pharmaceuticals and mainstream stuff, and but that awe of life is really, it's so critical. And I think I definitely have experienced, because like I was like super against Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, and I'm like, I'm not doing any of this bullshit. And I know we've talked about Christmas and like having kinds of overhauls on how we feel about it. But I see, like, I have been pretty like honest about Santa Claus since the get-go for my daughter. Really, like, we have the night before Christmas, and she she wants to read it. We'll read this book, and she'll talk about Santa Claus and just like want to believe in Santa Claus and want Santa Claus to be real. And so then I can't, because I come from this like boring, cut, dry, lack of awe kind of reality. You know, it's me stepping out of my comfort zone of like, I'm deceiving my child. I'm telling my child things that are true. It's like breaking away from all of that to free myself into saying, I don't actually know. Anything is possible. And like this year, reading about how Santa was actually the original shaman, and he was like going around delivering amanita mushrooms to everybody, and they were like having these great experiences. That's like a whole new thing and a whole new possibility that I didn't even know about, you know? So recognizing, you know, that there are these other layers of reality and other experiences that people have had or could be having. And I mean, I always believed in fairies as a kid and really wanted to like embody that belief and experience them and see them, and I never did. But as I have expanded my awareness and healed so much of my trauma, I am seeing that I'm more and more able to connect with awe and to like look out at trees and be spoken to, you know, in my heart. It's not like the tree's like talking at me, but like communicating messages to me. And like that's the inner wonder, the wonder of a child, you know, that people talk about. It's like so beautiful, this wonder of children. It's like we can continue to carry that by holding on to the possibility of other answers and other, you know, other stories for how things came to be. And like one of the books that we really like to read is, we read a lot at one point. It's called I can't remember what it's called. It's about Enoch Pak, this giant, and the hunter that he adopts. And it may be called like the Inuit hunter or something. But it talks about at the end like how, you know, a lot of people in the Arctic still believe that there are giants, and there are mountains that are sleeping giants that will one day wake up. And there's this one place where when I drive into town, there's a moment of coming up and cresting this hill, and I look out and I have this view of this mountain range, and it hits me every time. It is so stunning to just like come up and suddenly it's there. And I've started looking at it. I'm like, that is totally a face, and that could totally be the shape of a body. And like, whether it's actually a giant or not is irrelevant, because the possibility that there could be some other greater reality happening here than I can perceive with my five senses, like that's sort of the point. Like, what if that is a giant? Like, that would be crazy. That would totally rock everybody's world. But what if? You know, that what if space is the space of creation, of possibility, of the awe and wonder that makes life worth living.
Yeah. Well, and the whole, like, if you take this to what we usually talk about is, you know, belief, and if we take this to like an epigenetics viewpoint, even the biology of belief. So what you believe, like your actions will tell you, like someone's actions will tell you what their beliefs are, right? So you're creating your world with your belief system. So when we talk about the ancestors, like in Cherokee, I tell the Layla these stories all the time. There's the Cherokee little people, and you know, and there's different kinds of forest beings that live around, and those things, we call them myths now, but those things were very real and are very real to a lot of Cherokee people still to this day. And it's because they still believe in it. And when you look at these old stories too, like old stories about Santa Claus or whatever, and they talk about this, they're like, well, it doesn't exist if you don't believe in it. Like, you have to believe in it for it to exist, right? And I don't think it's necessarily that these things don't exist if we don't believe, but that they're not present to our eyes if we don't believe. And there's just, I don't know, I think for myself, I've just seen too many things to completely discount that there are other beings that exist. And, you know, when you start opening up those doors, things start happening. And definitely make you question a lot of things. But I really do think that it is about belief, and I think it makes people feel really safe to believe that these things don't exist, because it's like, and definitely scary movies, like horror movies, have ruined it for a lot of people. And so you feel like tickling on the back of your neck or your hair standing up, and people automatically are like, oh my God, it's a serial, like, killer monster thing, or like the worst thing you can imagine. And I mean, that's definitely something that I've gone through. And what I realize now is that it's just superstition, like that idea that, like, whatever is out there or whatever's communicating with me, I have a superstitious belief that it's something scary, right? And it's so funny because I used to make jokes about my mom and my grandma. I would say they were so superstitious. And I'm like, oh, well, that's just like, because my grandma still does things like not walk under a ladder, or you can't open an umbrella in her house. Nobody's allowed to wear hats in the house. Little things like that, my whole life I just grew up with that kind of stuff. And we would always be like, oh, Grandma, you're so superstitious. Well, those things seem so silly to me. Obviously, there was no meaning. But what I didn't realize is where those things come from are these stories of, like, how to please the Fae, or how to, when you go into the forest and the Nenyehi are, like, stealing your clothes or whatever, like doing mischievous things, like there are things that you can do that will please them so that they won't do that, or that they won't play tricks on you, or that they won't, lead you down the wrong path and get you lost, kind of thing. It all stems from that same stuff. It's just this modern world has implanted new images in the place of those old stories. And so I have had and still do sometimes get caught up in that whole my own version of superstition. And it's interesting to try to pick that apart. But
well, it makes me think of something that I've been sort of playing around with as a mental exercise, I guess, where, like, this idea that things don't exist unless we believe in them, but it's like that nothing is or isn't. Everything is in a state of potential reality and it's in a state of potentiality. Like, we were talking about Immaculate Conception when I was visiting, and, like, what I've sort of seen, like, this has come up a lot, like flat earth is a thing around here, and people have, very strong opinions about whether we're living on an earth plane or on a globe. And what I've kind of come to is that it is not fixed. And, like, maybe on some level there's an objective God reality, but, like, that if a person lives and experiences themselves and experiences their understanding of reality as being a globe in a solar system with planets and, everything rotating around the sun and multiple solar systems and all that, then that's the framework and the true reality that they live in. And if somebody feels themselves to be living on an earth plane that is, infinite in all directions and, all the things that go with that, then, like, they are, because everything is really based on relationship. Like, this Joe Spencer says that this is the plane of demonstration, which it is, but I think it's really the plane of relationship, because everything is mutable and everything is based on relationship, because everything is a subjective experience. Which is why, this whole thing about sovereignty is taking personal responsibility, because we are actually only experiencing everything through ourselves, and so we just have to own all of that. But it's why, like, one person could live in a reality that seems to be completely dissonant with the reality that I live in, because they both exist simultaneously. They're just like, you can't see where one reality ends and where one begins, because they appear to the naked eye to just be the same thing. Like, I'm a person, you're a person, we're both wearing these kinds of modern clothes, I'm in the store and you work at the store, and we're, like, having this, like, normal human interaction. But in reality, you're like operating in this one field and I'm operating in this other field. And so while we may interact, like, we're actually in two different realities. So,
yeah. I mean, that's like poverty consciousness, right? Like that's the example that came to my mind. Like thinking that you are poor and just living that out every day, having poor thoughts, you know, wearing clothes that make you look poor, you know, all these different kind of things, they all feed this thing of poverty consciousness, and we are all living in different realities. Like I know that, and the only reason I thought about this a lot, like, well, why is the overarching, like the dominant reality, why is that imposed, like why is that imposing itself in so many areas, and like why do I have to be imposed on by that? Why is my reality not imposing on other people, right, that aren't in alignment with me? And it's just because more people agree with the dominant reality, because more people are sheep and just want to be fed and not have to actually think for themselves. So that dominant reality only exists in the way that it does because enough people are agreeing to it. But if I got enough people to agree to my reality, then people would be living my reality, you know, like everybody would be living on land and growing their own food and whatever. But it is all about like the numbers. And so like I think that that's all shifting. Like that's one big huge thing that I have seen firsthand that's happening since this whole 2020 thing, is that so many people, I meet people all the time, they're just like getting back to the land. Oh, we moved out of the city and we moved to the country, and like getting just totally changing the way that they exist in the world. And they're just at the beginning of that process. And you know, I've been on that road for a long time, but I see people and it's just interesting to, like, it's so, what's the word? Like, it's so imperative for them that they do it like right now. They're like, I gotta do this right now. And they're like just trying to do everything at once. Like I have a few neighbors who are like this. They're just all of a sudden jumped into homesteading and now they're like buying everything and all that. I'm like, you really just don't even need all of that stuff, you know, like, but they just need to do it all. And it's such an interesting thing for me because we're like, yeah, but you don't really need any of that stuff to make it happen. But, yeah, watching that go down is pretty cool. I'm totally into it because more and more people are wanting to live with the land. And I know that eventually when you live with the land long enough, the land shapes you. So eventually these people, their consciousness is going to change to one that's more conducive to living with the land, as opposed to what chemicals can I dump on this to like kill it kind of thing, you know? So I don't know. Well, hopefully, I don't know. Maybe that's not true. Maybe that won't ever happen, but there's still farmers around here who dump tons of chemicals on stuff, I guess. But I wouldn't say they're really living with the land. They're living off the land. But homesteading is a different thing when you're trying to actually feed yourself and survive off of the land that you live on. So, yeah. Well, I feel complete. I feel like that was a good conversation, and so interesting that we were both, the embodiment thing was such a thing for both of us. So thank you for joining us for this conversation between women, and we will catch you all next month.